Hello everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video on special education law. This video will cover special education prior to 1970 and after 1970. We will also go over two court cases that are very important to the foundation of special education and students' rights for education. And finally, we'll go over a couple resources just to help you stay up to date on the ever-changing special education laws in your state and nationally. So to begin, for 1970, we're talking 1918 is the first time schools are compulsory attendance. So students have to go to school by law. However, students with disabilities were still getting sent home because of their disabilities, saying they were not able to be educated, or maybe they made people nauseated. So they sent them home, did not give them an education. In 1933, in the state of Ohio, parents started the Council for the Retarded Children. And their fight was to get the state to provide an education for their children. And so by doing that, they were able to get a classroom in which they had to sponsor to educate their children. Now, a little bit later, 1950s, there's councils from around the nation started to team up together, and we get the National Association for Retarded Citizens, and that would get started to set up the foundation that we have today for special education. Next, leading up to the 1970s, we have a major event going on in America. We have the Civil Rights Movement. And in 1965, we'll have the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which would prohibit discrimination based on race, sex, disability, anything. Prohibit it all, and this is which right after this is where we're going to have education. Because now we have to stop discriminating in education, which means discriminating against disabled kids and also discrimination against race with segregation. Big issue in the 1960s and following after that. However, so we have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And this act is important because it's the first time the federal government would provide direct funding to improve education for students who had disadvantages as well as those with disabilities. So we have the government providing the money. So now the money should not be an issue. Money's coming in to provide the resources to teach disadvantaged students as well as those with disabilities. So we got a very slow start to special education and leading up to the 1970s. However, the 70s would start out with a boost as the passing of the Education for the Handicapped Act of 1970, which would be a foundational case to build the rest of special education law. This act would actually fund colleges or places of higher education to teach teachers who will be teaching students with disabilities. Now, this is very important because now teachers will have the means and the funds to teach the students with disabilities. No more excuses, right? Maybe not. Following this, the next big thing that would pass is the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which would ensure that students with handicaps would receive an education according to their needs. So basically an appropriate education based on the disabilities that the student may have. Next, we have in 1990, we see a big thing pass. We have the Individuals with Disabilities we saw the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1990, more commonly known as IDEA. This was big, major, and it was a game changer in terms of special education as it started a foundation. They had a whole set of 13 disabilities that were on there that students could be diagnosed with. It brought up the IEP Individual Education Program and really set a whole foundation for what our special education program is today. Very important. It would set guidelines for what a disability is and also using people first language, meaning that you would now say the student with a disability, not a disabled student, no longer calling a student disabled in that sense. So it was an act that stayed with us that we still have today, and it would also have revisions. And in 2004, there was another revision in which required teachers to have a special education certificate, meaning they know or are trained to work with students with special needs. So that was a very quick history. I know I'm running out of time, so got to keep on going. Two court cases. We have Park, P-A-R-C versus Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania was denying students with disabilities their right to education because the state had statutes saying that if a student was not able to be educated, then you don't have to educate them. And if they don't have the mental ability of a 5-year-old, then they can't attend school, which is not right under the Brown versus the Board of Education, stated that you cannot discriminate against students based on what they look or disabilities that they have. And so this agreement established that any child thought to be mentally disabled or mentally challenged would be provided due process and get the services they need with their disability. Next, we have the Mills versus the Board of Education, which is the same exact year. Mills versus the Board of Education of the District of Columbia, same exact year as the Park versus Pennsylvania. And it was very similar. In fact, it was a similar when it comes to the student rights of the students. This case fought for students who had been denied education because of their disabilities, emotional disabilities, and all disabilities that could happen. It was all there. And it was found that it was unconstitutional and that they must provide them, and the school system decided to say they didn't have the funds to it. And now, so they're working on getting more and more funds going that way. I'm at 6 minutes. Whew. Resources. So there are many sites today that you can frequently look at to stay up to date with special education. The first website is educationnext.org, which is a great website. It tells you everything that's changing, everything that's coming up. Fantastic website. Next is the IDEA website, which goes all over the IDEA law and has changes in there. You can look up everything in there where funding comes from each little service that your student will receive. Next, we have Legal Aid Georgia, or Georgia Legal Aid. GeorgiaLegalAid.org. Fantastic website. Tells you every change that is going on in Georgia, every case that's going on, when they may have results of the case, and what changes will be made to special education law in that state. So, thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it informative. And thank you for taking time. Hope you learned it, and watch it again if you have any questions.